Steve had a...
Welcome to Conversations with Big Rich. This is an interview-style podcast. Those interviews are all involved in the off-road industry. Being involved, like all of my guests are, is a lifestyle, not just a job. I talk to competitive teams, racers, rock crawlers, business owners, employees, media, and private park owners, men and women who have found their way into this exciting and addictive lifestyle. We discuss their personal history, struggles, successes, and reboots. We dive into what drives them to stay active in off-road. We all hope to shed some light on how to find a path into this world we live and love and call off-road.
Whether you're crawling the red rocks of Moab or hauling your toys to the trail, Maxxis has the tires you can trust for performance and durability. 4 wheels or 2. Maxxis tires are the choice of champions because they know that whether for work or play, for fun or competition, Maxxis tires deliver. Choose Maxxis. Tread victoriously.
If you still love the idea of a printed magazine, something to save and read at any time, Forlow Magazine is a magazine for you. Forlow cannot be found in a storefront or on a bookshelf, but you can have it delivered to your home or place of business. Visit forlowmagazine.com to order your subscription today. On this week's episode of Conversations with Big Rich, we have Clifton Slay. Clifton is a father, a paramedic, dirt pilot, special forces, canine handler, search and rescue, and founder of Poison Spyder Customs. Clifton, it's great to have you on board here and talk about your life and history in off-road. And before that, and how you got into off-road. And, you know, I'd like to say I've known you for a long time and hope to get to know you a lot better with this conversation. So thank you for coming on board.
Yeah, thank you, Big Rich. It's an honor to be asked to be on your podcast. So I do my best with my memory of all these years and see if I can get it as accurate as I can remember.
Yeah, no worries. One of the things that I've realized myself is that I can remember stories, situations, things that happened, but I cannot necessarily put an exact date on things. And as we get older, you know, it's like, it happened 22 years ago, but I couldn't tell you what day it happened.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I'll try to stay in the right decade. You let me know.
There you go. Okay. So the first thing that I need to ask you is, where were you born and raised?
I'm from Denver, Colorado. Raised here mostly. I spent some time in Arkansas. My father is an archaeologist there and stayed there. And I was in the military. I traveled around and the different Army bases and stuff, but came home to Colorado and still here.
Okay, cool. You, where did you primarily go to school? Say grade school to begin with.
Oh gosh, let's see. Polton Elementary, which is it's in Aurora, Colorado, and so that area, so just around the Denver area, all through school, and then college stuff as well.
And then you said your dad was an archaeologist, so you were moving. Was he doing like dig site type stuff, or?
Yeah, my dad was a huge influence on me. He's specialized in Native Americans and prehistory. So I grew up with my dad on dig sites in the dirt with old bandanas and arrowheads and all that kind of stuff. So definitely groomed me to the life in the dirt for sure, and just the appreciation of the outdoors.
Well, that's awesome. I love I guess you'd call it the Neo-American history, you know, anything that happened in the, you know, on our continent through the years, and the study of how man evolved here. I find that quite fascinating.
Yeah, it made for a unique childhood for sure, and I appreciated it, but I appreciate it more as an adult now. Just realizing the exposures and the his perspectives, and like I said, it ties into off-road as well, not into the Jeeps and stuff necessarily, but just the appreciation of being outdoors and mountaineering and that sort of stuff, and how I still sort of tie all that together is a huge influence from my dad.
Okay. So you said that you went through school in the Aurora, Denver area. Did you graduate in that area, or were you was the moving around come after that, or?
No, I did. I went through most of my high school in in Arkansas, but came back for my senior year in Denver and actually saw a lot of my friends from grade school and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I finished here and then went straight in the military.
Okay. We'll get to the military here in a minute. Explore the schooling a little bit more. When you, how many years were you in Arkansas?
4 years.
Okay, so like eighth grade through 11th, and then senior year of high school back in Aurora?
Sounds accurate,
Okay.
Rich. Yeah, about like that, like 13 to 17, I think, something like that.
Okay.
Ages 13, 17, that's Arkansas. Then finished up here.
Was there a large gap in lifestyle from Colorado to Arkansas?
Oh gosh, yeah. Arkansas, you were a bit of a celebrity coming from a big city, and Colorado, it seemed exotic, I think, to a lot of the people there at the time. Just Bible Belt stuff versus more progressive attitudes here in Colorado was a bit of a shock for me. Clintons were the governor of the state, and not that that was necessarily significant, but I remember them coming to our school and telling us that Ozzy Osbourne, Motley Crue, and Judas Priest and all those, and Led Zeppelin were all devil worshippers and that kind of stuff. That was my first exposure to the Someday Presidents, and of course those were all the bands I loved. So I was definitely riding my bike around with the boombox playing Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, and all that stuff. So it made me a bit of a pariah in that small town. So.
I can understand that. I kind of felt the same way when I moved to southern Utah, and when my son, Little Rich, started eighth grade when we made the move there, and I can remember like the first day of school, his teacher asked him, what was, what religion are you? And we were kind of. I've always considered myself, and I just say this as a joke, agnostic with atheist tendencies. And,
sure, yeah, I can see that.
And he goes and says, I'm a Darwinist.
Oh, gosh.
And that went over really well.
I bet it did not. Well, I will parrot your story a bit in that I actually took a world history class there, and this will give you sort of an idea, and it was actually a Bible study class. Now, I'm not saying that's not history, but the depth of the history, was only a couple thousand years old, so it was a little bit tough. And I argued a couple points and ended up actually getting expelled from school because some of my upbringing of my father, of course, didn't buck religion, but it also expanded beyond, those years. So my dad actually challenged the teacher to an all-school debate on history, and to try to get me back into school. And of course, the school denied, because my dad would have cleaned him up and probably not supported some of the themes that were being pushed forward.
Right.
But yeah, so I get that, Rich. Kind of with some of the same stuff that your son went through, I think I did as well. So
when you were at that age, were you athletic, scholastic, or did your own thing?
Oh gosh, no. I was a long-haired car guy, chasing girls and doing artwork, and that's what I was. I tried athletics. I used to be the fastest kid in school for a long time, so I had that going, but I just didn't have a draw towards it. I really loved working on cars, like I said, doing artwork stuff, and growing my hair long and chasing women. So, and that, I wouldn't say that's how my whole life went, but those skills, and I'll let you pick which ones you want, tended to still be prevalent throughout my current life and everything else. So it was a good, oh, it was a good match for off-road, because I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but those art skills and love of cars and that type of thing was really set the stage. That really set the stage for my off-road career as well.
Okay. So then moving back to Colorado from Arkansas, that was a step back in the right direction. Did that happen soon after they being expelled?
Oh, it was around that same time, and it wasn't the cause of me coming back to Colorado. My dad ended up getting the state archaeologist job here in Colorado, which is a dream job in his world. And so he came back, I came back, my mom and family was all here, so it just made sense.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That'd be a pretty maybe not a cush job, but I mean, makes a, where you're saying that's a kind of a dream job. I would imagine working for the state as the archaeologist, that's pretty dang cool.
Yeah, just the type of work, less ticks, less drug dealers, less heat and humidity. I don't know, and even though he's Southern born, he sort of had a John Denver story and moved here to go to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. That's where he met my mom. So he was definitely mostly at home in Colorado. So when he left, I did as well.
Okay. So let's get into vehicles. I would imagine there in Colorado, like everybody, you had bicycles. What was your first mode of motorized transportation?
Let me think about it. A 50cc Suzuki moped.
Nice.
Yeah, I would not popular with the girls, but I did manage to blow the motor on it and be able to do wheelies and that kind of stuff and jump it. So,
you mean you couldn't take girls out for a dinner date on a moped?
I could. It's hard to compete with the guys with the Chevelles. So
yeah.
So that was short-lived. As soon as I was 15, I started saving up and actually wanted either a Chevelle or a Baja Bug, and ended up with a Baja Bug. It was 1970, and that really started my off-road love, really, because I really love bugs.
I think that that 6970 Bug is probably the best years that they made Volkswagens, because of the swing axles, or the independent rear, I guess you would call it, and then the difference of not going to the struts but still being the double beam front.
Oh, sure.
Most people are going to go, what is he talking about, if they never owned a Bug?
Well, yeah. I don't think that I looked at all that stuff at 15, but I just thought it looked cool and started learning how to paint, build motors, and try to make it so I could compete, not off-road compete, but just compete for cool cars in high school and just have fun with it. And I ended up through high school having about 5 different Bajas of different levels.
Awesome.
And ended up being, again, not trying to segue ahead of time, but ended up sort of segueing in my Jeep world, because I pushed the limits of those Bajas, especially in Colorado, with more of the rocky trails and that kind of stuff, and found that I really needed another axle to drive up the front. So that's how I ended up with Jeeps.
And when did you step into Jeeps?
My stepdad had a 83 CJ7 that he had about 400,000 miles on it, and he sold it to me for $1. And I sold my last Baja Bug, which was pretty sweet. It had a 2275 dual carb with the bus tranny, Corvette white, and that thing could do wheelies. You could jump. It was beautiful. But I sold that thing and poured everything into the 83, and then that 83 ended up being the original Bruiser.
Oh,
CJ. That was famous for a long time.
right.
And still have it actually. But that was his Jeep. Like I said, I got it for $1 and just started working.
You
You
still have it?
I still have the shell.
Okay.
It was stolen in 2000 and destroyed pretty much, and which was sad because I was really done with it. So it was just going to be a fixture to have as we were starting into our buggy transitions. But I look at that Jeep today, and every time I'm at Moab, I could still do all the trails and do all the stuff. The technology hasn't passed it up. So in its final configuration, coilovers and stretched and bobbed and shrunk and tube framed and all that kind of stuff. So it'd still hang.
Awesome. So right after high school, you went into the military?
Yeah, it was either art school or the military, and I was just finishing high school, and like I said, I wasn't the most scholarly student. Like I said, I really like to focus on the other trifecta that I talked about, which was the girls and the cars and artwork and stuff. So I was ready not to be in school, even in art school, which I loved. So growing up with my dad was also in the military as well. He actually started off in the Navy, transferred to the Air Force Academy through college, and then later on joined the Army and did that in the Guard while he was an archaeologist at the same time. And so I kind of grew up with that. I never really thought of it as a teenager. I thought, the stuff my dad does seems pretty tough. But when it came down to it and I was 18, it looked like a good option for a while, and he encouraged me to do that as well. I actually went in to be a forward observation pilot, and I can't remember the helicopter type, but that's what I signed up for, and I was going to go to Fort Rucker, Alabama. Pretty excited about that, and I thought I'd have a career in aircraft and helicopters. And between the time that I signed up and then they do a second physical, I had become colorblind. So
wow, okay.
The Army owned me, but they couldn't send me to be a pilot because of that. However, they did say that I was blue-green or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but blue-green. So they said, but you can see camouflage better, and you've got these scores that would have put you into the realm of being able to go be a pilot, so you can kind of pick what you want. But I had to make a decision in about 30 minutes. So, of course, they have the books.
Here, make a life decision.
Yes.
It's going to affect you the rest of your life, and you have 30 minutes to do it.
And they reinforced to me that they still owned me. I'd already signed, so I had to do something. And I've never done things because it's about money or a particular status or motivations that way. So I just wanted to do something that was an adventure. So as I was looking through, I looked up, and of course they have the recruitment posters, and they always show the coolest jobs, which were the fellas on the rubber duckies, which are basically a raft type of boat with the machine guns, charging the beach and jumping out airplanes and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, well, what is that? And they're like, oh, well, that's special forces. And they try to talk me out of it. I'm like, well, I'll just do that. That looks interesting. And that started me getting into something. Of course, didn't really know what I was getting myself into. At 18, you think you know everything, and you figure out, there's the poster, there's the job description, whatever. But they wouldn't just let me go. I actually had to interview, go sit with one of the A teams and be interviewed, and made sure that I was a good candidate, that I understood what that life was. And that I would 100% come out injured, and that it's not the regular military, all this kind of stuff. And I still had hair down my back, so I was still kind of a hippie kid with Led Zeppelin boots and all that kind of stuff. And I'd go into these interviews, it was super awkward. And I thought, oh, they'll never pick me. But I think for whatever reason, they thought I was, trying to think of the term, odd, peculiar, unique. I'm not really sure. Special Forces soldiers are definitely different. So whatever they saw in me, they allowed me to go. And so I went, started off, you got to start off at infantry school. So you got an infantry discipline. Mine was mortars. And you got to go through a series of schools before you can go to a selection process.
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm going beyond your question.
No, not at all. You're going great.
So it was all very new to me. Of course, I'd lost my my long hair. Thrived. I didn't love the infantry, as it seemed very regimented, and I don't know. I just didn't fit well, and I've never been good at following orders, especially. So I thought maybe I'd made a mistake. Actually, when I got to Fort Bragg, they said, all that stuff you learn in the infantry, forget it. You're an individual. We work in small teams. They support sort of the more rogue mentality. And I realized I was home at that point. Went through the selection process. That's basically a shakeout to try to get people to quit. Our particular class was 360 guys. This was just before Desert Shield. And by the end of it, we'd actually had 2 guys die in selection. And 60 made it, or the 360. I'm sorry, 80 made it. Sorry, this is old history, so I'm trying to remember, Rich. 80 made it, and then they picked 40 of us. So I have to admit, I did not think I was going to make it. Thank goodness I'd been in the infantry prior, so it toughened up my feet. I was used to sleeping in the dirt with my dad and in the infantry, and but I was still kind of a skinny kid. There were some pretty big dudes, looked a lot tougher than me, but it was had more to do with mental stuff than it did really physicality. So
right.
From there, you go to your MOS language schools, and pretty much you spend your entire career going through schools and doing small deployments and things. So to answer your question about that, Rich?
Yep, sure did. So then Special Forces, we won't get too deep into that because a lot of that stuff is, of course, probably classified or something, but you spent a lot of time in the sandbox then?
Our area operations was Southeast Asia.
Okay.
We were, the languages that our team spoke, of course, English, but Thai and Chinese. And our who we were attached to was the Thai Special Forces, and at the time the Soviet Union was falling. China was still seen as a threat, and even though the Soviet Union was falling, we still were groomed as the Soviet Union being the enemy.
Okay.
So we were a front line if that expansion ever went south. And with SF, you travel to different parts of the world. So depending on what's happening, just because you specialize in a certain area, you might get moved around to others. And if there's a need, there wasn't that many of us at the time. The numbers were never published, but I could tell you that when we'd go to other bases and things like that, there'd usually be 2 or 3 of us on an entire base. So it was unique.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So then, how long were you in the military?
5 years. As I had the fate of many of my cohorts there, you kind of stay on the teams, and you try to, although you accumulate injuries, you either stay on the teams as long as you can, and then you go on to military intelligence or other aspects of the of the SF battalions. I ended up getting enough accumulated injuries that took me off the team, and my options weren't things I wanted to do, which was teaching language class for Thai, teaching weapons, doing that sort of stuff. So it put me in more of a teaching cadre role if I'd stayed, and that's just not what I wanted to do. So I got out and did my rehab at Fitzsimmons Hospital here in Denver. They allowed me to do that since it was home, and unexpectedly kind of got out. My big plan was to retire on the Special Forces teams, become a smoke jumper, and live with my dogs up in Montana and fight fires in the summer. And that was my big life plan. And after the 5 years in the service, which I loved and hated with equal measure, all of a sudden was back in Denver and didn't know what to do.
So artwork and grow your hair back out?
That was perfect, because I did try to grow my hair back out, and guess what? It wasn't there anymore. So what had happened in my stint in the Army is I became bald just like my dad, but I didn't know that until I got out and regrew it, and it just didn't quite grow back in the same places. So but artwork, maybe. I actually started trying to be a real estate appraiser, but the first day I had to wear a tie and some other stuff, and it was such a huge contrast from living in the shit with the forces that I just couldn't do it. And I started working at I had my Jeep, and I started working at a small off-road shop in Denver on Saturdays, and it paid nothing. I think I got paid $5 an hour or something, but I loved it. And the advice from my dad was, he's like, do something you really love and don't worry about the money will come. And so I gave up on the real estate appraising, which I would never last in, but I gave up on that and started working this off-road shop, and that again helped sort of set the stage for me to carry on.
It's amazing how our parents or grandparents can be influential by saying something like that. I've mentioned it before in other podcasts that, my grandfather had said, that figure out what it is that you love to do in life and then how to make a living doing it. And not so much money related living, but how you get to live your life. And then it took me until I was 42 to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was good advice.
Absolutely.
For both of us, truly. And I have to admit, when I heard it, I just like, how am I going to, like, this Jeep thing, $5 an hour, this is it? Like, I can't do this. I'm living in poverty, but finding a way to do it.
So do you remember the name of that Jeep shop?
Oh yeah, it was called Wilderness Off-Road.
Okay. It
was not remarkable in the great lineage of the industry. A couple people might know it here in Denver, and it's faded away. I don't know exactly when, but it faded away.
And then, so you went from there to doing your own thing, or did you step into another shop?
Well, Wilderness was here, and then Dixie Peck and Four Wheel Parts moved to Denver. Now, Dixie Peck they were enemies at the time. They were not married entities, which I think they are now. But so Dixie Peck had their own little shop and warehouse, and Four Wheel Parts did as well. At the time, Four Wheel Parts only had 2 stores in California, and they did a store here in Denver. And I'm trying to remember how they recruited me. I was working for Camp Jeep in the summer as a trail guide up on Holy Cross Mountain, and they were doing some sponsorship stuff or something there, and it talked to me about working at Four Wheel Parts. And of course, I saw them as Californians. No offense to y'all, but sort of out-of-staters, and also, sort of a big company that might squash small mom-pop shops here. So I didn't view them in a good light, but they offered me $12 an hour, and it was more than twice what I was making, and that was a big deal then. And they also brought me in and said, hey, we want they basically hired me as a local Colorado personality, somebody that was in the sort of the Jeeping community, knew the trails. And my Jeep at the time was like sprung over with Dana Scout 44s and 35s and some other stuff. So it was pretty extreme for the time. And so I switched. I went to 4 Wheel Parts. Greg Adler was working for his dad. And again, they only had 3 stores. So I saw Adler quite a bit. And did engine swaps and did sort of extreme stuff that you couldn't possibly get 4 Wheel Parts to do anymore, but because we were doing custom work, so I was sort of their custom guy. And from there, and Rich, I'll do my best to intermingle all these happenings. I was still working at Camp Jeep in the summers as a trail guide, ran into JP Magazine. It was brand new back then. I couldn't tell you who the people is I ran into, but they did a story on my Jeep, and I think I was memorable because during the story I actually rolled the Jeep, so which was not, I didn't intend to do that. Although later in my career I would roll vehicles with no problem, and if it was a good story, then sweet. But at the time it was totally unintentional, but it made for a good story for them, and I made that connection. They we're also friends with Sport Utility magazine, if you remember Sport Utility.
Yep.
And Ken Yee and McMillan owned Sport Utility. I couldn't tell you where Ken Yee was from, but McMillan lived in Buena Vista, Colorado. And he owned Tomkin as well. And that's where the Tom Ken comes from. Tom McMillan and Ken Yee. Okay. So that's where the origin of that name comes from. And they had a small, shop, and they were building like battery, dual battery trays and body armor and kind of these dorky, like metal channel bumpers and stuff. I mean, it wasn't revolutionary, but it fit a niche. But he used to have parties there at his house in Buena Vista. Went to one of those parties and I met Steve Remore, and Steve was out of Bayfield, Colorado, and was starting Avalanche Engineering.
Okay.
And Steve had a CJ6 with full width axles and partial tubed and some other stuff. It was really sweet. And I had my full width axle Jeep, and we were really an anomaly. Like, everybody looked at us like we were crazy because everybody was running like CJ7s, FJ40s. That was sort of the staple. 33s were the biggest thing, so 35 seemed nutty. And Steve and I really bonded because we just appreciated each other. And so we started the conversation about starting Avalanche Engineering together. And do you remember Avalanche?
Oh, Rich? Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Not everybody will, but I think it's significant. We did some pretty big things at the time. But at the same time, through that Sport Utility contact with JP and all that sort of stuff, JP asked me if I would start writing articles for JP Magazine. So I started writing tech articles for them, still at 4 Wheel Parts, and having conversations with Remore about Avalanche. At some point, the magazine gig was really good, and I felt like the thing with Steve and I was going to be legit, so I quit 4 Wheel Parts and jumped off the cliff, and Steve and I did Avalanche. I had a small shop in Denver, continued with JP for a couple of years, and then quit because the Avalanche was just getting too busy. which was unfortunate because the month I quit, they hired Payway the next month. And of course, Payway was a legend, and I was writing, JP Magazine at the time was more about like, why does my soft top leak, and what's the best 1-inch body lift, and why does my Jeep squeak, and this kind of stuff. And so those were the type of articles I was writing, and then Payway took it over, and of course, transformed that into a real magazine. So I did regret not writing together with Payway, because he was a big deal at the time.
Right.
It still is for sure.
Absolutely.
But as an underling, it's in the industry, I was just trying to chip my way in. To have the chance to be with Payway would have been awesome. But we would reconnect later for sure. From there, am I moving along okay, Big Rich?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. You just let me know if I'm getting off track.
Okay.
So Steve and I did Avalanche. He had some like quarter elliptic kits and a couple I can't remember everything that we had to start off with. I basically started machining and designing stuff that didn't exist but was needed for our crowd, which was super nichey, which was the full width axle hardcore crowd, which I have to admit I didn't really know if it would go anywhere, because at the time the off-road industry was all about double tube Smitty built bumpers and Nerf bars and big arced stiff leaf springed vehicles that didn't have any flex, a bunch of diamond plate armor stuff, and shiny wheels. It made our off-road harder, and it was more of a car show than it was like a functional type of thing.
Right.
The stuff Steve and I were doing was all about function and didn't have anything to do with flashy light bars and stuff. So it wasn't popular, but we started building it, and like I said, machining high steer arms for 44s and 60s, making full width kits for CJs, quarter elliptic kits. Started working with Sway Away to figure out, do coilovers make sense for off-road? With some of our 4-link suspensions, it seemed like that was the right thing to go, because the standard valved hydraulic shocks weren't doing it. So we just had all these sort of challenges. The other thing is we were just destroying bodied vehicles. We were doing trails that were not meant. We were doing parts of trails that people weren't thinking that was part of the trail. We were doing sort of this crazy stuff, but we were just wrecking bodies. So Steve and I, along with, remind me, Rich, what's the guy that made Scorpion?
Sonny.
Oh, yep, there we go. Sonny started doing the Scorpions. Steve was doing
Snipers.
the Sniper chassis,
Yep.
and that one-off Assassin chassis. So we were working on those, and of course they were super revolutionary, and just an awesome design. Steve was a great engineer and still is. So we started really focusing on that. Beadlocks weren't a thing, so I was trying to figure out how to we not bust beads, and we were all running big swampers with heavy walls, those TSLs, if you guys remember those boggers, and they were indestructible, but they just fell off wheels. And of course 15-inch wheels were the thing, so you had these huge sidewalls, put all these leverage on them, and they're always falling off. So I tapped into the racing world, started talking to the circle track guys, and started trying to, like, how are you guys keeping your tires on? So they showed me these beadlock things. Of course, they were all put on with these chintzy rings with like sheet metal screws. And we tried that once, and of course it just fell apart. So I realized what we needed just didn't exist, that's what we were in the business of, which was building things that just hadn't been thought of or hadn't been applied to off-road. So we started building it with 5/16 bolts, but we were running 40s, 42s. That stuff was falling apart. Started running 3/8 on steel wheels with 15s and machining our own rings, that sort of stuff. And we finally found something that really worked. And that's where the beadlock so I feel like the beadlock revolution kind of started happening, and then of course other companies like Larry at Trail Ready and some others started kind of seeing this and doing a great job with their own style. Am I going too fast or too slow, Big Rich?
Nope, you're doing great.
Okay.
I'll direct the conversation as we need to, but you're cruising right along. It's awesome.
Okay. Well, if I ramble, you let me know.
No worries.
And so from there, we really had some products that just didn't exist. So we were the source. And for Steve and I, it wasn't we weren't like, wow, we're really going to cash in. We really viewed it as a love of the sport. And it was all about that. It was the love of the game. We're building cool products. We were just poor off-roader designers. And we never really thought that it would be anything. And we started getting busy and started getting really busy. And it was...
A lot of guys came through Avalanche. A lot of guys in the industry.
Yeah, there's some good ones. I saw Eric. I'm trying to remember. Eric's just Motive Gear now, I think.
Yep.
I've got several names I don't remember. But
Drew Barber.
Oh, of course, yeah, Drew. Yeah, Drew was really key in Steve's operation. So, but Steve and I were a huge juggernaut. I was really, to this day, I'm sad that we didn't stay together longer, but we just did things differently. He really wanted to focus on the competition side, excuse me, which was great, but as I was seeing the company grow, I felt like the competition products, and you know this, there's a ceiling, because if you're a competitor, you want everything for free, usually. Or a promoter. Or something. So catering to the competition crowd is small as well. And I've been on both ends of it. I've been the competitor and I've been the sponsor and been everything, and I get it. Yeah, you're used to being showered with products. But it wasn't a good business plan, I didn't think.
Right.
So Steve really wanted to focus Avalanche that way, and I really felt like the recreational crowd was what was missing. So I really wanted to make a hybrid, and that's where Avalanche and I split off, and Steve continued with it for a number of years with the snipers and the other products he was doing. But I forged Poison Spyder at the time, and that was that break to really go towards the rec crowd.
Do you think that the competition helped breed the technology?
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Rich, I do agree with you. I have to say that I think that the type of off-roading that we were doing in those times was pre-competition. So I felt like they mirrored the competitions based off the level of extreme wheeling we were doing.
Right.
And so the initial vehicles were like, oh yeah, you guys are throwing stuff at us that we do recreationally. And so we had already started building products to survive that. Now, granted, what we were doing then in competition is not some of the twisted stuff that you have built since. So I think at some point that is totally correct, where people were trying to take that comp technology and ideas and apply them to recreational vehicles, and it fits. It does work. If it survives in competition, it should survive in recreational.
Right. Okay.
So I agree, but I do think the extreme wheeling came first.
Oh, exactly. Yeah.
Because we had like the 99 and the 2000 Warren competition, rock climbing competition, which we all just brought our trail rigs to. It wasn't nobody built a vehicle for the competition. We just brought what we brung what we normally run, and those competitions, some of the fellas even didn't trailer them. We just drove them to the competition. So.
Right. No, I remember those early days that, guys would show up with basically almost brand new TJs on 35s, or, Steve in a sniper, Sonny in the Scorpion, and then you had Campbell and Pinky, and you just looked at the wide variety of vehicles that were competing, and it was pretty insane, all in one class.
Yeah, and I'll throw two others in there too, which was the Currys had the Fire Ant.
Yep.
With Wagner.
Yes, Jeff
Wagner. Am I remembering that right? And then you also had Chris Durham come along. He was a little bit after the beginning. Oh gosh, and it hurts me that I can't remember his name. The big brown CJ7 out of Oklahoma. Big block motor. Sam Patton. Yep, so Sam Patton. Yeah, some really love dudes there. So that's who showed up. Again, I mentioned Durham. We were not friends at the time because we were kind of dominating. It was sort of like the refinement of the Currys versus sort of the greasy engineering that Remore and I were doing with the snipers and the 1-ton rear steer and all that kind of stuff. So I always felt like we were gonna win, or the Fire Ant was gonna win, and then here comes this guy from South Carolina with a rat tail that's about 3 feet long, shorts, boots, and white socks, and with a southern accent, with a J10 truck, and
the original rock bouncer.
Yeah, I didn't give that thing a second thought. I was like, okay, no worries with this one. But where we were finessing and maneuvering and jiving through the cones and all that kind of stuff, here comes Durham, and he's full throttle. I swear he had his eyes closed half the time, and just bouncing up and kicking us, beating us. So I remember meeting Durham, and I was stunned that he beat us with his style. But clearly his talent has carried him through, and he had a talent then. It was just unknown.
Yep, exactly. He could feel a car when the car wasn't even on. There was his style definitely was not, the super technical, tire placement just here and there, and his line was, just stay between those cones and right. Nail it.
Yeah. It's like we were all stunned. I don't think I was alone, but it was revolutionary for that at the time. And we were, like I said, we were still working on parts that survive. We were almost too heavy with the sniper and too big, but it was cool times.
I remember in Phoenix, or Steve was competing in. It was an ARCA event, and it was the obstacle was on lower woodpecker, but the courses went from lower to upper. And he blew up. I think he had the Rockwells under it at that time.
Yep.
And he blew up one of those 2.5-ton axles.
It banged. Yeah.
Man, everybody jumped. It was like a sonic boom, compared to everything else breaking.
Yeah, I was. I think I was about 5 feet from that axle when it popped. So, and we were amazed. And you correct me, I'm trying to remember, I think he went under an undercut with those 44-inch swampers. And I remember making eye contact with him, and we're like, well, it's never broke before, so it should survive. And he went under that undercut and gave it, gassed it. I think he had a 350 in that thing, but with those gears, anyway, we were all surprised, but it did blow, and I don't think we had a spare.
I can also remember there's, that lower woodpecker is a wash, and there's a slight bank, probably 15, 20 foot tall, and the spectators were sitting along that bank, and there was some guy there that goes, man, I drive this trail all the time. I can't believe these guys can't make this. And I looked at him and I said, you don't drive it the same way that they're driving it. You may go up this wash, but you're driving around those rocks. You're not going over the top of them.
Yeah.
And he started to argue with me, and I said, I'll give you $100 right now if you go get your Jeep and you can drive that same line that Steve had just broke on.
Yeah.
And I said, I'll give you the $100 in my pocket right now if you can do that. And he goes, okay, I'll do that. And he wanders off, and we never saw him again.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Those were some wild days.
Yeah, so Poison Spyder did pretty good. We took a lot of those innovative products, designs, and had the Bruiser chassis as well. We had already started the Bruiser in the Avalanche days, and that chassis was supposed to be I won't say the everyman's chassis, but one thing that was I thought was missing was that, yeah, we could build 2 buggies, but they were so expensive. And we were building those chromoly dragster housing axles. I don't know if you remember those.
Right.
We'd put portals on them, and they were so beautiful. They were polished chromoly and 9-inch centers, and we were putting them on these chromoly chassis, and we had these exotic vehicles that nobody could afford. And although it made a name for us, I was still feeling for the guys that had the CJ5 at home with the Dana 30 and the Dana 20 or the AMC 20 in the back and all that other stuff. And those guys were, I felt like we still needed to cater to them because that was our roots. And so that's where the Bruiser chassis came. And of course, it was inspired by my original Bruiser Jeep. And I was trying to make an affordable platform for regular people. And that's where that came from.
So those that wanted to go out and wheel harder stuff than a full body vehicle could do.
Yeah, because it's still the same thing. The people that were coming out and wheeling those extreme trails at the time were still destroying their Jeeps. Or I won't say just Jeeps, but Broncos and Toyotas and everything else. And so that's why a buggy made the most sense, because you could roll it, you could smash it, you could put it on the side, you could do whatever. You weren't having frames tear out. You weren't having motor mounts collapse and all this kind of stuff, engines shifting and taking out radiators. And you could make sort of this indestructible-ish platform. And that's where the buggies really came from. But that's where the Bruiser came from, is I was trying to make it accessible. And it was successful.
Right. And that's when you became recognizable to me, is with the Bruiser chassis and Poison Spyder, and doing the I would almost say, most of the stuff that I remember was like show car quality, though.
Mm-hmm.
The dashes and the paint jobs and everything were it was that car show type stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Custom cars.
Well, that's what was missing in the rock crawling world, is we were so rudimentary, so function, but and the Snipers had their great lines, and some of the other buggies, and but Sonny's, sort of sniper, or almost like a Hummer looking buggy Scorpion kind of a thing, and this where kind of my artistic side came in. I'm like, wow, it's magic if you could make it have style and function. And that became the pulse of Poison Spyder, was function and style. And I felt like at the time, Chip Foose and a lot of those sort of hot rod things were going on. I looked at some of the stuff they were doing, and I'm like, why aren't we doing this? And so integrated those into the buggies, and then I just thought you had it all. You had a hot rod, but you could still, you weren't just regulated to streets. You could go off-road and sort of have your rock rod, and that's why I call them rock rods.
And it was, being in Colorado helped because licensing was a lot easier there than a lot of states.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Originally, I would look for like a Willys or an old Flatty or something like that was $400. And I would show up at a farm and buy a a clapped out Willys for $400, and I'd give them $400, and I would take the plate off of it, and I'm like, this is all I needed. Title and the plate, sir. You can keep your Jeep. It's just not gonna have this plate anymore. And it was very symbiotic. And I had several guys kind of actually looked for them, so I had a collection of old Willys titles and plates, and then we would attach those to the buggies. Later on, I talked to the state, and they actually let me register them as a kit vehicle. They just had to adhere to current emissions. And when we first started, that seemed like more of a challenge. But once we started using LSs and current engines that were crate motors and stuff like that, it was pretty easy because they always passed emissions.
Right. They were, computer controlled and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Now, I don't think that would have flown in California, but we weren't there. So
right.
You could buy them here, and then if they went to California or something, they would have to be trailered, but we could drive them there. We could drive them, cross country because they were a plated vehicle.
Yes, and you guys did the tail lights and headlights and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm, yeah, we made it all have the street legalish. I would famously be harassed in Utah, and because even though they were street legal in Colorado, of course, we went to Moab. We were. And I think me in particular was a real target. And I remember one year, Ned Bacon, I'm sure you know Ned.
Oh, yeah.
He had Spyder, is that right?
The Bumblebee or
Bumblebee, yeah,
yep.
Thank you. But he and I always had a little side competition to see who could get the most tickets at Jeep Safari. And I was good for one a day, and he was good for about one a day. So
that's hilarious.
I would come home with my roll of tickets and then just write a check to them and move on. But they used to pull me over in Moab, and I knew the police by name because they pulled me over so much. And they would sometimes, if you remember the heydays back like in the 2000, I don't know, 3 through 7 probably is, I'd say, the pinnacle of Jeep Safari as far as attendance.
Right.
They used to pull me over right in the center of town, put 3 rigs on me with spotlights, and they'd make me sit there for 20 minutes. And they would tell me, they're like, we're going to give you a ticket, but you have to stay for 20 minutes because they wanted to make a spectacle out of it so that everybody knew if I got pulled over that they would get pulled over. So, and I have to say, it really did not make me happy because I had better stuff to do than be a spectacle for the local police there. And I also felt like I pumped a lot of their economy, and that may or may not be true, but it definitely was at least adding to the renting hotels and paying tickets. But
that's pretty good.
Yeah, I diverted somehow. Oh yeah, Bruiser chassis. I think we were talking about those. So they ended up being a great buggy and a great platform, and I think they still would be today if they were around.
I agree. I think that I found it interesting back then watching the evolution, I guess is the best way to put it, of vehicles, from the very beginning, where everybody just run what you brung, what you could drive. Some of them were absolutely daily drivers that people showed up to compete in or go trail wheeling in. And then that metamorphosis, kind of like the worm or the stages of becoming a moth or a butterfly, and yeah, how that transition went. It was kind of cool back then to watch that. And I feel sorry for the guys that are in the sport now or in the industry that never got to witness that evolution.
Yeah, and I will let me swing back.
Sure.
And let me tie into what you just said. And again, I'm going to circle back.
Absolutely.
back when I was doing the JP Magazine thing, and I'd retired. I don't retired because I wasn't there 20 years, but just a couple of years. I'd actually started writing for 4x4 Power, which was Tom Moore was the editor. Do you remember that
Yes,
magazine?
absolutely.
It was like the everyday man's four-wheel and off-road. Um, I still have my banners that hang in my garage from 4x4 Power that nobody remembers. But at that same time was about when the TJs came out in 97. I think it was 97.
Yeah.
So in 1996, I was working at Camp Jeep as a guide up on Holy Cross Mountain, and Camp Jeep closed down, and they asked if I would stay a couple days after because they wanted to have me do some private guiding for Chrysler on Holy Cross. And I was like, sure, yeah, no problem. I didn't know what it was all about. Well, they brought a YJ TJ hybrid out on the trail, and it had coils all the way around and like 31s, but it had the TJ suspension that was going to be what they were working on, kind of the skunk work stuff. So my year might be wrong. It might have been 95, but it was the first time that I'd seen coil suspension that we hadn't just built on a Jeep. Because before that, it was all leaf springs, and coils were exotic.
Yes.
Like you would steal them off of box Broncos and put them front and rear, steal their long arms and that kind of stuff. And we kind of looked at that thing, and I was like, okay. I was like, we can try and get it up Holy Cross. And we did, and it did well. I mean, we beat it up, but we got it up Holy Cross, and they said, well, this is going to be a production vehicle. And of course, it ended up being the Rubicon a couple years later. And I recognized it. I was like, hold on, this is going to be available like off the lot? And they're like, yes. And I knew things were changing because you allow people that had no trail experience, no etiquette, didn't know how to use a winch and that kind of stuff, and you give them a locked vehicle off the lot with coil springs that's this capable. Of course, I had no idea what it was really going to do to the industry, but I knew it was going to be something. And sure enough, if you remember, Rich, a couple years later, they came up with those Rubicons, and I think the first time I really remember seeing them probably was at Camp Jeep that year, but it was also at Jeep Safari, and they were doing really well.
Yeah.
And it was kind of stand in the face of us that we were all fabricators and builders. And, when we got to the top of the mountain, especially the extreme trails, we were it. There was like 4 or 5 of us, and all the riffraff that had regular Jeeps and things couldn't make it that far, and we could have the lake to ourselves. And all that changed with the Rubicon because now everyday man could purchase something for, I'm going to make up this number, but like 25 grand or something, and do a lot of the trails that we were doing, and they didn't need necessarily a fabricator like us to make it. So that's when I really started seeing the industry shift.
I agree.
It also took out a lot of the driving. So I'll fast forward to, I didn't guide at Jeep Safari this year, but I was still there. Last year,
this year, I got to interrupt you. This year was probably the worst driving that I've seen on the trails in 20 years.
It's painful. It is painful. I'm still doing guiding, but mostly industry people. But when you get out on the trails and you've got the brand new Jeeps and they're already Rubicons and they show up with 37s, and I'm watching them go through the trails that we used to drive CJ5s through with open diffs and 31s, and we did it better. It is hard to watch because there's no learning curve. They didn't start with Willys or a driving a covered wagon FJ40 with leaf springs and 31s and open diffs to learn how to drive the machine and have that feel.
True.
They're just getting into a superhero Jeep right away that the capabilities are way beyond the driver.
Exactly. And that's I guess that's one of my pet peeves nowadays. And it's part of that no etiquette on the trail, and the resource damage that happens to our wheeling areas, because they and I'm not going to say everybody that drives like a JK or a JL or
Sure,
a
of course.
Gladiator or anything else that's off the lot, but there's a majority of them that can't pick a line if to save their life. And I mean, learning to wheel when you didn't have lockers, you were leaf sprung, and you had to pick a line to get up the hill instead of just point and shoot, really makes for a different style and and I see it today so much. I mean, we were coming up Cane Creek, and we were at the top there, or what is called the top, but that Hamburger Hill area.
Yep.
And there was a group in front of us that their cars, they had them sideways, almost going off the cliff, and guys, people spotting that had no clue what they were doing spotting people. And the people that were with us were brand new. I mean, was part of Charlene's Ladies Off-Road Network, and these girls, some of them had done nothing but top of the world the day before. And mean, totally brand new to the rocks and dirt. And it freaked some of them out watching the group in front of us try to get up that hill.
Yeah, because they assumed that was them.
Yeah, they thought, okay, this, we're almost going to drive off the hill, and we're going to do this. And it's like, no. Just pay attention. And, between Ben Bauer, Charlene Bauer, and myself, taking different parts of that climb, we got everybody up there safely. One car did get a little damage, but there was no breakage or anything like that, and nobody got crazy.
Yeah,
and it was really sad to see that that there was such a lack of understanding of what it takes to get a vehicle up a hill without just pounding the hell out of it.
Well, Big Rich, that's the Jeep TJ Rubicon's fault. That's what I think.
But I think it also pushed the industry from being, so niche.
For sure.
And then the JK came along and saved the whole off-road industry, I believe, because, it brought people into the sport, or into the genre, you might say, when the economy was so poor that so many businesses were lost.
Yeah, well, and I can relate to that myself. That was a tough time,
Yes.
But the JK was huge. TJ was big as well, and it was kind of a deal with the devil with the Rubicon, because it did allow the unskilled dirt pilot to join the ranks, but they also had a little bit more money than the early Toyota and CJ crowd, and so they bought the Rubicon and they wanted stuff, and it definitely was made the industry more robust, and I definitely benefited from it, because we started building TJ products, and that the buggy stuff and the innovation was all there, but what kept the lights on was selling and designing TJ products at the time.
Right. Yep.
But keeping to our code of building top quality style products, and that's what really launched us into I'd say the bigger arena, to where we started getting noticed at a more globally.
So the name Poison Spyder, did you take that from the trail, or where did the name come from?
I'm going to give you the long answer here, which was it's really when we started with Avalanche. So Steve came up with Avalanche. He was an engineer. that was his name. So Steve had Avalanche. The name was an oddity in the off-road community because everybody was like Sam's Off-Road or somebody off-road or Extreme Off-Road, or everything had an off-road. Most had some off-road moniker on the end of it. And so when we went with Avalanche Engineering, it wasn't, we had some marketing to do, because what the phone calls I was getting was people that actually were wanting us to set explosives on the side of the mountains to start avalanches. Because that is an avalanche engineering, I guess. So, but through, I won't raise our flag necessarily, but through our talent and some notoriety, it became a name that stood alone without having to have off-road on it. So when I started Poison Spyder Customs, I really wanted to embody our code, which was sort of that rock rod mentality and quality. And I recognized that was sort of like a customs, almost like a motorcycle customs, or like some of the hot rod stuff happened in Southern California. But I also wanted to tie it into our lineage. And Moab was my second home for a long time, and it actually started there backpacking with my dad in the 80s. And so I loved that area, and were there a lot. Even I actually wheeled more in Moab truly than I did in Colorado. So I wanted to tie in to an area we loved and send the right message. And I didn't want it to say off-road, because that was just going to get lost with all the extreme off-roads and everything else. So we actually started trying to figure out logos, and a buddy of mine built that Spyder logo. And he worked for Coors, and he did all their marketing. So Coors is in Golden, Colorado, which is just right by where we live. And he had built this cool Spyder that was for his Jeep club that was going to be like the Creepy Crawlers or something. And I said, let me buy that from you. And I bought that logo for $700.
Good investment.
And, yeah. And then the symbol in it, in the butt of the Spyder, it's not really the butt, I guess the body of the Spyder, was from a trip that I had taken to Geneva in Sweden with a former girlfriend, and she had bought this necklace for me, and it was that symbol. I don't know what it meant, some kind of Viking thing or something, but I really liked it because we needed something other than just having a black body. So put that symbol in it, Creepy Crawler logo, got rid of the Creepy Crawler, tied in with Moab with the Poison Spyder, dropped in the customs, and that's where it came from.
Okay.
And obviously it seemed to work okay, and the name built all right. And although some other companies came out with this and that customs, we were never shadowed by anybody.
Right. For real. That's absolutely true. So then from the Poison Spyder, eventually you got out of that, and did you shelve the name first, or were you still doing work on it when you sold the company?
Oh gosh, there's so much backstory here, Rich. Well, let me get to what happened at Poison Spyder.
Okay, no worries.
I think we'll be missing that large chasm of the story.
True.
So I'm a great, well, I won't say I'm a great designer and all this stuff, but I did pretty good. I do pretty good with that stuff. And that was, as an artist and a wheeler, that was my strength. Running businesses is not.
As is most everybody in our industry.
So I made a lot of catastrophic mistakes. However, because we'd stayed true to that core, our people stayed true to us as well, even with some of the mistakes I made. There was a lot of mimickers out there, and still to this day, I can watch vehicles drive by with my designs on it. And so I saw all these companies, and some of them were just there just to reproduce my designs. And that became frustrating. When we used to go to SEMA and show there, I noticed some of the overseas companies were doing the same thing. So what I would do is I'd actually purposely build flaws into the products for SEMA, and then a lot of the copycat products came out with those flaws. And that way, at least I'd screw them on their jigs for about 6 months. But that weighed on me because when I first entered the industry, it was so small, and the Currys were like the gods at that time, and they were the ones on front of Sport Utility like every other issue, and they were sort of the rule, but it was still a small world. And so when I started building products, all of us had our phone numbers. So excuse me. So when I'll give you an example. The original rocker knocker that I built, which was the guards for CJs and TJs and MyJs, all that stuff. I called it the rocker knocker off of from Pritchett Canyon, but originally I named it Eldorado, the Eldorado sliders. And Frank Curry called me and he's like, "Hey, we've got I think they had a Jeep of theirs. They were calling the Eldorado or something." And he was like, "We're calling our Jeep that. I'm afraid it'll be confusing." And I was like, "Cool, no problem. I'll change it to something else." And those are the simple conversations we did out of respect for each other. Back in Mountain Off-Road was around there, and I think that more is still around when Chris Overacker had it. We would exchange products, but whatever Chris was working on, like those bomb-proof motor mounts for engine swaps and that kind of stuff, I knew how to build them. I've been building them a long time, but because Chris had them, I wasn't going to build them, so I wouldn't compete with him. And that was just how the industry was. We talked to each other, and we're like, "Oh, you're working on that? I'll work on this." And it was very honorable. And I saw the trend of the off-road industry at that time happening. It was just switching. There was money to be made, so when big money came in, those players were being eaten up, and the people that were taking over these companies and were really copying all the innovators' products didn't live with the same code, business or personally, and it just made me very disheartened, because I really saw off-road as a very purist community. And I was getting discouraged with that. Plus, Poison Spyder was exploding, and I was trying to match the size of the company as far as the business part, and I wasn't able to do it well because I just wasn't equipped. I just didn't have the tools to run the company at that size. I did feel like it had to grow because we were being sort of we had the enemies at the gates, because people were reproducing our products. They were better business people. They had more money. They had all these things. So I thought the answer was to grow. So I felt like there was strength in size. So the company was getting so big that I didn't know the people that worked for me anymore. It used to be I'd walk in and turn on the lights in the shop, and I knew all my guys, and we went over what we were doing with the buggies and design. And sometimes I'd work on the plasma table for a while. Sometimes I'd sit in the back and weld for a couple hours. I'd go bend tube with the fellas, and that was kind of what Poison Spyder was. I had the same work shirt that everybody that worked for me had. Still had the same scars from welding splatter and all that kind of stuff. And that was when it was awesome. But when we started growing, to sort of meet this demand, or my perceived reaction to what I thought had to happen to keep Poison Spyder around, it just grew too big, and I just didn't love it anymore. I couldn't ever be away from it, and the business stuff became more overwhelming, and the core of why I'd started it, which was for the love of the game, was farther and farther in the distance. And then, of course, the economy crashed, and I was actually getting calls from other companies that were collapsing and saying, hey, can you take over manufacturing so we can keep our name, but you build it. You build the products. The other thing that happened at that time was Polaris was coming out with a razor, and they had approached me and said, hey, we're going to send you these 2 prototype, like 4-wheel drive. They're not ATVs, but you sit in them. There's like 2 chairs, there's 2 seats. And I went out to Polaris and looked at these things, and they were what razors are now. And they were like, we'd like you to design the suspension and some other products for it. And then at all our hub dealerships, there'll be a Poison Spyder model, along with, I think Walker Evans was going to do one as well, and somebody else. But we would have our signature products on them as well. And then we're going to contract with Polaris to build those products and only sell them to Polaris. So anyway, Rich, all this stuff was happening at once. I was looking at what it would take to take on all this business. And I was going to have to borrow millions, hire lots of people, have AM, PM shifts 7 days a week. And at this very same time, my wife and I were having kids, and I had a brand new baby, and I was very stressed all the time. And I was like, nope, this is not why I did this. But I'd gone too far, Rich. I'd gone too far. I'd bought the big building. I had done all the stuff. I had the water jets and all the huge table, all the manufacturing. So I had that overhead, and it went from being a love to just being a shack. I was shackled to it. So the idea was to sell Poison Spyder and come back home. And I don't mean literal home, but I mean come back to why I was in the industry, which is small custom work with quality products, and have an employee base where I still knew their families and knew their names, and I could still go out and shop and weld, and that was okay. So the economy crashed, went to sell it, and one of the big suitors was 4-wheel parts. And even though I'd had a history with 4-wheel parts and Adler specifically, I wouldn't say we were friends, but we were good acquaintances, and we knew each other because I knew him from my early 20s. And we had a bit of a falling out because when we started selling products, 4-wheel parts, they made copy products through Smittybilt.
Yep.
And I won't get into all that, but Adler and I had quite the scene at SEMA when I went by the Smittybilt booth and saw that they were exactly my products. But so where this comes into play is when 4-wheel parts talked to me about buying Poison Spyder, I was not a no, I was a hell no. I was like, it didn't matter how much money they were offering me, that's not what Poison Spyder was. Poison Spyder was an enthusiast-driven, purist company, and there was no way I was going to have a big company own it. And so I turned down their offer, which was good. I would have just retired, or it would have launched me into the small shop at the time. But I was really looking for somebody that I felt was an enthusiast, had the right heart for it, would carry it on, at least as I saw it. I knew there wasn't another me specifically, but somebody that was checked some of those boxes. And that's when we got contacted by the McRaes. I'd known them from one Ultimate Adventure they did with us, I think in 2000. And I know Larry had done some competitions. So not like a force. He wasn't like a force in the industry, but he seemed to fit that criteria. And that's why I went with them instead of 4-wheel parts.
Makes sense. I get it.
And so that way the idea was I was going to drop out, do American Rock Rods. We'd still have our Spiderlock wheels, which was still a good business. And I could machine the wheels. We had them built through Wheel Pros, which my kid's mom's family owned most of Wheel Pros, which has like American Racing, KMC, all that kind of stuff. So they were doing our molds for us, but we were getting them shipped in bulk, and I could machine lug patterns and be with my toddler while I was machining wheels, and it was a pretty good life, and that was our plan. And I don't want to get into the muck, but what ended up happening with Foil Parts is didn't go the way I planned, and me and the McRaes are not friends anymore, and as far as I'll go with that. And then ultimately, I think they sold it to Foil Parts or Transamerican within a couple of years, which was exactly what I didn't want to happen to it. And now it is what it is. But that's what happened to Foil Parts, and there's lots of torrid details there. But I choose to not. I'm choosing not to live in that anymore. So I don't think about it.
I get it. Okay.
From there, we kept the wheels, Spyderlock wheels, which still around. Me and the kid's mom ended up getting a divorce. A lot of the stress from that and from the dealings with, I'm going to coin it as giving up Poison Spyder, sort of selling, but it's not really. I don't know how to say it well, but we also had our son was born prematurely. AJ had a preeclamptic thing, or we'll get into deep medical stuff here, but basically the placenta separates and the baby and mom can bleed to death. And so we had our son a couple months early, premature, and we had the stress of that and not having the money from Poison Spyder, and it was just a whole lot. And we were looking at court dates and lawyers and all that kind of stuff, and it was so much stress on our marriage that we ended up getting divorced. So AJ ended up keeping Spyderlock wheels, and she still has it to this day and is doing a good job with it. And from then I was doing American Rock Rods, which was really supposed to be what I wanted it to be, which was a small shop building buggies again. We restarted the Bruiser chassis. I designed a couple more, made even a more rudimentary chassis called the Mantis, which was even more affordable. I was trying to make a $1,500 chassis.
Wow.
And it was a cool chassis. It was a really cool chassis. But as I told you before, my business end isn't always the best, and ended up partnering with somebody that didn't have the same goals I did, so we ended up dismantling American Rock Rods. And at that point, felt like the off-road industry was so toxic to me. I don't mean like y'all were all toxic. I spent my experience in it was so toxic, I just had to step away. At this very same time, and where it was the epiphany for the decision, is my dad passed away in a canyon just south of Moab. And I was in Moab when I got the call and had to go recover my dad's stuff out of the canyon. And I spent a week down there refollowing his maps, trying to figure out what happened, seeing where search and rescue had come, picked him up with the helicopter, and going through reports. And we had a lot of unknowns there. And being my dad's son, I knew how he wrote his notes, how he followed his maps, how he traveled. He would canyoneer solo, and that's what he was doing on a 7-day. And I spent my 7 days down there retracing his steps. And in that time, I just realized that I had to just leave the off-road industry because there was just too much. I couldn't keep fighting that battle, and everything was, like I said, too toxic. So the epiphany was, as I was talking to the search and rescue people and the EMS providers and all that kind of stuff, I was like, I'm going to do that. I love that. It's a connection with my dad. It's backcountry stuff. And that's how I ended up coming back to Colorado and starting my career in emergency medicine.
Okay. I didn't know if it was that or your special forces, if you were, combat medic or something like that got you going in that direction.
No, I wasn't that cool. I was a weapons and a commo guy, which we were still pretty cool. We had we were experts in all type of weaponry, foreign and domestic. And also we had like a cool satellite dish that folded out of our backpack, and we'd encrypt code and that kind of stuff. So still pretty cool, but not as cool as the medics. The deltas on the teams were the paramedic equivalent, and I would say that they actually bridged somewhere between a doctor and a paramedic. But the amount of MOS schooling was a lot longer than weapons and commo. And as an early 20s soldier, I wanted to be done sooner. I did grow to regret that, because when I talked to my buddies, they went to Fort Sam Houston, which is the medical base, and it is full of nurses. So they were there for a couple years with just nurses and
short hair.
Yes. So I'll just leave it at that. So I did regret that, but no. So I wasn't a medic. We did cross over with, especially since we had such small teams, we did end up doing a lot of trauma, not what would encompass like a street EMS provider that works with medical emergencies as much. The Army deals mostly with early 20s acute trauma.
Right.
So I did have some of that. So I did have that foundation when I started off with the foundational provider level, which is EMT. So, and I had seen things that didn't make some of the things I was seeing there. I had those exposures, so I wasn't shocked by seeing people twisted up and burned and bleeding, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that did work.
And is that what you're continuing to do primarily now?
Well, I've done it for 12 years. I initially came back from the thing with my dad and joined a search and rescue team here in Colorado, and really tried out. It's not you have to try out. I shadowed them for about 5 months, then was try out. That was about a year process. Took my EMT, which at the time was about a 6-month thing, and I just delved into that. Knew the EMT was way too limiting, and so I realized that the paramedics were the ones that were really in charge. And so my goal was to get my paramedic. And so by the time I got through all my basic search through search and rescue, EMT and my paramedic took about 5 years. And I lived in that world, which was totally different than my off-road. And nobody knew me. That was different. I was used to moving in circles where I was known and celebrated. And when I got there, I was another EMT, another paramedic, and that's okay. EMS work is not about you. It's about the people you're helping. So it helped me cleanse from that time. And from that, I started doing instructing. I got recruited to be an instructor for EMTs and paramedics. And so for the last 12 years, I've been doing that, being a primary instructor at the Denver Paramedics and being a street medic and doing search and rescue. To add to that, 3 years ago, I added a canine as a partner. So I currently have a canine partner, and she doesn't do the medical stuff, but she will travel with me on helicopters and travel with me on snowmobiles. She'll hike with me, and she's a tracker. So she tracks down patients or people, and then if they need medical care, then I'm the medic as well. So it's kind of a really cool thing to be in EMS.
That's interesting. The canines, it's amazing to me what we have done with our relationship with dogs. Throughout history,
Mm-hmm.
but the everything. I mean, it's amazing how that relationship and how close the canine and the human are to each other, with I don't know what you call it. It's like a mutual aid almost, whether it's as a service dog or as a war type situation or rescue type situation or TSA type things. I mean, it's really a crazy, in a great way, relationship.
Yeah, it's really rewarding. My dog's name is Valkyrie. She's a Dutch Shepherd, super awesome, dedicated. She is put in dangerous situations and does well. She's a really good. She's an air scent dog, which means she will track on the ground, but she will track you by the smell that you and the skin flakes and things like that you put off in the air. She'll track you that way. But it's super neat. It's a neat community all in itself. Search and rescue has their specialties, command and drones and general troopers, medical, canines, ATVs. So it has all these really kind of neat things where they fracture off too. But I have the one I love, which is having the canine plus being the paramedic. So it's really a cool spot to be in. And then teaching. I love to teach. Like I said, I've been a full-time teacher for my own EMT academies, IB courses, tactical courses, which is like a care under fire for police departments. I do a cadaver lab at birthing, so OB obstetrics for emergency medicine. So I've been doing all that stuff.
Wow.
And that's been a real love. And actually, when I saw you in Moab, I had resigned from my position with Denver Paramedics that day, and that's where I was doing that, teaching the academy. And I had decided that I was going to actually come back to the off-road world, at least part-time, because I had done full circle. Like I said, I sort of cleansed. I came back to Moab. I wanted to see, does anybody still remember me? Not that that's totally important, but it's something to see if, I'm can come back to the community and not have to start from zero. And when I saw you at Grandpa's Garage, that was part of that for me. I wanted to shake hands, hug people, look in people's eyes, see if I was still part of that community. And I was very welcomed. And even though I've been doing Ultimate Adventure with the cronies and the fellas every year still, that's been kind of my connection with the off-road industry. I haven't gone to SEMA. I haven't been going to Jeep Safari too much, here and there to help guide, but very little. So it was a real privilege for you to ask me to be on the podcast, and it was also affirmation that maybe there's still something to be done here.
I think so. I mean, the enthusiast part of our industry is becoming more, what's the term I want? Experience driven.
Okay.
Instead of just owning a vehicle and going out with a couple of friends and doing local stuff, I see the industry expanding into getting experiences with others that share the same interest in the industry, but that enthusiast wants to get closer to the center. And part of that is being with people that have a lot of experience and can take them places and give them that experience. Kind of like, the like Jeep Camp or, some of those things that are going on. People want those experiences now instead of just reading about them.
Well, that's good to hear. Just because some of what I'm doing now, I'm still going to do paramedic work. I think I'm going to do some wildland fire paramedicine over the summer and do some of that. But I'm actually, from my trip to Moab, where I just saw you a couple weeks ago, I heard a lot of that sort of echoed by many people. Made a contact out there with Overland Expo, and they're actually hiring me, contracting me to be one of their instructors to start traveling with them and teaching winching techniques and driving and all that kind of thing.
Awesome.
And I have to admit, I'd never been to one. They seem really organized, and I looked over it, talked to people, and I'm like, wow, these are big events. And it actually echoes exactly what you just said. They're coming there for this experience, and that's why they thought I was a good fit, because of long time experience and
knowing how to teach.
Yeah, and so yeah, my teaching thing, and I have to tell you, Special Forces, we were really teachers first. And I didn't really think about it, but we used to be, our job was called force multiplication. And you see a lot of the kind of the Rambo movie stuff and that kind of thing, but ultimately our job one was teaching, and our job was to go into areas and teach the indigenous population that fits the agenda of whatever's going on. I won't get into the politics of it, but movement tactics, how to use NATO weapons, all that sort of stuff. So we did force multiplication through teaching, and I really loved it. And I didn't really thought myself as a teacher. And once I got into EMS, I was teaching. I'm like, wow, I really do love this. But that combined experience, I think, is going to really bolster my ability to drop back into teaching some of these skills to the new people, to the industry at these expos and otherwise.
I think it's a great fit. From what I know of you, and I mean, I can't say that we were ever great friends, but we were acquaintances. And I would watch your progression, because I've always tried to figure out what it is ultimately I want to do. I mean, I didn't want to give up the competition scene because of everybody else had, and I was still the only one. At this point, I was like really the only one doing it across the country. There was little pockets of competitions going on at certain parks or whatever, and maybe a state here or there, but club type things. But it wasn't, competition scene was not as prevalent, but yet there's still a lot of industry around it, that the competition supported. So I love the competition, so I didn't want to get away from that. Well, now that we found somebody to continue that, I'm looking for my next phase, and one of those things is, of course, continuing to build Forlow magazine, but also I want more of the experience myself. And I think that's where I see, the future, maybe not, in the pure overlanding sense, but, there's opportunities out there to get people, the experience, to get the people the experiences that they're looking for. So, that's one of the avenues that I'm looking into.
Well, we'll have to continue to talk, Big Rich. Part of I'm going to try not to self-promote here, but it seems like it's.
Oh, absolutely, do it.
It's warranted, just because it's Lynn's in our conversation. So what I'm doing now, like I said, I just decided I wanted to come home back to the off-road industry, but I still love paramedicine. So I'm still on my search and rescue team. Of course, I wouldn't give up my canine. So we're still doing that, but I'm starting 2 YouTube channels. They're both going to be really unique. The off-road one is wide open. Some product reviews, that kind of stuff, some builds. That stuff's been done. But I want to cover some of the personalities as well, but also do some teaching on there. I see that more as just a community thing for the off-road. My other one is going to be for the emergency responder world, and that's actually the one that I think will be bigger, just because I think the audience is bigger and I think the need is greater. And I'm going to be teaching skills, emergency skills, backcountry skills, and doing profiles on responders and canine hero dogs and that sort of stuff. So that's my next thing. And I think I'll go back doing trail guiding and Moab and other things as well.
Well, cool.
So I think you'll see me showing up at Moab. I'll still continue to do Ultimate Adventure with the gang every year, and I'm going to go ahead and be the paramedic for the Overland Adventure that Four Wheeler does as well, and hopefully get back in a little bit of racing, and then kind of have my foot in both the emergency world and the off-road world, and then blend them together.
Perfect. Well, as that progresses, let's keep in touch, because I'd love to help promote that for you.
Yeah, I sure will. It's the name of it is Hoplite. It's called Hoplite VentureTrek, and it's I would say it kind of goes down like you're like, well, what's Poison Spyder? What's Avalanche Engineering? It's similar. The word hoplite is like a Spartan soldier, so it has that military tie-in with the bonded camaraderie of those types of soldiers. And that's why I used that name. And VentureTrek just sort of, when you just say it, it sounds like sort of adventure, and trek almost like a quest. And put those together, and I think it's a name that people won't know what that is, but
we'll look for it.
But if I can repeat my successes with logos and names in the past that I have, then I think it will be so unique that people will know it and won't confuse it with anything else.
And what's the spelling on that hoplite?
It's Hoplite.
Okay, that's what I had written down.
Yeah.
And then VentureTrek, TRC.
Yeah, like VentureTrek.
Okay.
That was tough. That was tough, Rich. I didn't want to misspell on your podcast.
Well, the great thing is, if you had, we could always, edit it and then redo it. So not a problem.
No, it's all right. I'm not flawless. I wouldn't want you to do that. So, but do rewind it. Make sure I spelled it right. And if I didn't, then just correct it. Whatever.
No worries.
But I started the website started, and the YouTube channel series will probably start July, August. We've already started some of it, but I'm in a realm that although I know the subject matter, the production end of it, I'm having to learn. So
that's one of the things that like this podcast is just audio. To me, that's a lot easier to do because I can edit it a lot easier than if we were doing it video.
Oh, sure.
These guys that are like Fred and some of these others that have their YouTube channels or channels that they're producing the video, audio, and all that together. I mean, it just seems to me like I'd need a production staff where, with the podcast, I can do just Shelley and I can get it out and get it out relatively quickly. Same with our magazine. That's one of the great things about owning your own magazine is without all those layers is that, if something happens today, and we're in the process of editing the next issue, I can put it in there. I can do anything I want,
Right.
So I can always be faster than everybody else. Not, maybe just not as much coverage as some of the guys that have been around forever. But that video production, man, it just seems like a lot of work.
Well, it is. I definitely jumped off the cliff with that one, and I'm actually inspired by Fred and Dave because when I went to Moab, they're part of my circle, and riding with them and just kind of feeling it out with my buddies and Trent McGee as well, and Vern, Simons, Christian Hazel.
Yep.
Not trying to name drop. It's just, that's kind of my circle, but they're in touch with this stuff.
Yes.
And I was like, what is there to do in the off-road industry? Like, I don't need to be a rock star anymore. And I just, I'm not driven for that, but I still love the community. What's there to do here? And that was their recommendation. They're like, hey, you have this vast experience in these different ways. They're doing their Dirt Every Day show, and Fred and Dave are not doing the production part, so they're not feeling the pressure of that. But they're also on a schedule and stuff like that, which I will not be. But they really pushed me in this direction, and I'm with you. Trying to learn all the production part of it is daunting, but I'll get there. Like, that's why I'm trying to put a realistic date on the pod, or not podcast, but the episodes to sort of start. And I'm sure a lot of them will be rougher than they will in a couple of years after I've gotten some experience with it.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that with the podcast. I think my interview style is a lot better now than what it was when I first started. I had no clue what I was doing. Shelley's been after me for years to do the podcast, and she goes, everybody, you can easily reach out to these people and get their stories. And during the beginning of COVID lockdown, we were stuck in our little hotel in
Yeah.
in Texas with like,
Uh-huh.
I had nothing to do. There was nothing going on. And so it was like, okay, what am I going to do besides just sit here? And I said, okay, I'm ready to do this podcast thing.
Yeah.
And so it was jump in with both feet. And, I wasn't worried about equipment. I wasn't worried about quality of sound. Those things have just kind of morphed as we've gone along. But it's, the learning curve is substantial, even though anybody else might not realize it unless they've tried to do it themselves. But the video is just adds a whole nother layer.
Yeah.
And I'm an old dog now,
I think we're both old dogs, but well, I will let you know when they start coming out. You can let me know if they are poorly done, and maybe I should go back to doing something else and stick with paramedicine and canines. So.
Well, I'm gonna watch on it, so watch what you're doing.
All right. Well, Rich, it's been a real honor. I really do appreciate you asking me to come on, and it was nice to tell the story, and hopefully you get at least more than 3 people to tune into this interview.
Oh, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people tune in, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing your life and what you've done in off-road and what you're doing, where you're going with everything, and opening that window to us. It's we appreciate it.
Well, off-road community's been good to me. It has, and like I said, I've had some ups and downs, but all of us that have been in it for a while, or if you're in anything, that's just going to be the way it is. But like I said, I feel like I'm coming home and look forward to seeing you guys' faces more.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing. Take care, and we will talk again.
All right, sir. Thanks,
Okay.
Rich.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Conversations with Big Rich. Please let your friends know about this podcast. Let us know what you think of Conversations with Big Rich. Please forward ideas to me, contacts of those that I should attempt to interview. Leave a rating on any of the services you found us on. We look forward to your comments and ideas. Enjoying life is a must. Follow your dreams and grab all the gusto you can.